The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat against the rain-slicked asphalt, casting erratic shadows over the empty parking lot of the roadside diner. It was just past midnight in the dusty outskirts of a forgotten town, where the highway stretched into oblivion under a sky heavy with storm clouds. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of burnt coffee and grease, the kind that clung to your clothes long after you'd left. Emily, the waitress on the late shift, wiped down the counter for the third time that night, her hands trembling slightly from the chill seeping through the thin glass windows. She'd been working here for 5 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the lonely travelers, truckers nursing black coffee, salesmen with tired eyes. But tonight felt different, wrong. A low rumble pierced the quiet, growing into the thunderous growl of a motorcycle engine. Headlights sliced through the downpour as a lone rider pulled into the lot, his bike gleaming wet under the diner's glow. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the patter of rain on the roof. Emily watched from the window as the man dismounted, his leather jacket slick with water, broad shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked like he'd ridden through hell itself, scarred hands pulling off his helmet to reveal a face etched with lines that spoke of old wounds, both seen and unseen. Ethan. That's what his patch said on the back of his vest. Iron Promise MC, with a faded emblem of a chain, unbroken. He was in his late 40s, the kind of man who carried the weight of forgotten wars in his gait, a Vietnam vet's son who traded dog tags for handlebars after losing his brother to a senseless border skirmish years back. He pushed open the door, the bell jingling like a warning. Water dripped from his boots onto the checkered floor as he slid onto a stool at the counter, his eyes scanning the empty room before settling on the menu without really seeing it. "Coffee, black," he muttered, voice gravelly from the road. Emily nodded, pouring from the pot with practiced ease, but her mind raced. Earlier that evening, just after closing time, she'd seen them, 2 shadows in the lot, tools glinting under the security light. They'd tampered with something, laughing low as they worked on a bike that matched the one now parked outside. Brakes, she was sure of it. Cut lines, sabotage plain as day. Her heart pounded as she set the mug down, steam rising like a ghost between them. Before she could speak, the door burst open again, slamming against the wall with a force that rattled the salt shakers. 3 men stormed in, reeking of cheap whiskey and malice, their faces twisted in the harsh fluorescent light. The leader, a burly type with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, pointed a thick finger at Ethan. "You think you can ride through our turf without paying respect, old man? That bike's collateral now." His cronies flanked him, cracking knuckles, eyes gleaming with the false bravado of men who preyed on the isolated. Emily froze behind the counter, her pulse thundering in her ears. This wasn't just a shakedown, it was personal, the kind of grudge that festered in small towns like this one, where old debts and corrupt sheriffs turned blind eyes. Ethan didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of coffee, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer, his gaze steady as weathered steel. "I don't owe you a damn thing," he said quietly, but there was an undercurrent in his voice, a promise forged in fire. Years ago, in the dim bars of his youth, he'd sworn an oath to his fallen brother: protect the innocent, stand for the forgotten. It was the Iron Promise, the code that bound his crew across state lines, a family pieced together from broken soldiers and lost souls. He'd buried that vow under miles of blacktop, running from the ghosts of a divorce and a daughter he couldn't save from her own demons. But here, in this rain-lashed diner, it stirred like an engine revving to life. The leader laughed, a bark that echoed off the Formica walls, and lunged forward, grabbing Ethan's collar. The stool scraped back, and in a blur of motion Ethan twisted free, his fist connecting with a solid thud against the man's jaw, not to kill, but to warn. The other 2 piled on, fists flying in a chaotic frenzy, chairs toppling like dominoes. Emily ducked behind the counter, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The metallic tang of fear mixing with the spilled coffee. Punches landed with dull impacts, grunts filling the air, but Ethan fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, precise, unyielding. His scars a map of battles won through sheer will. As the brawl spilled toward the door, Emily's resolve cracked. She couldn't just hide. Grabbing her coat, she bolted out the back, rain lashing her face as she circled to the parking lot. The bike stood vulnerable, its chrome frame beaded with water, and there, under the headlight's faint beam, she saw the damage, severed brake lines, fluid pooling like blood on the asphalt. Her hands shook as she knelt, confirming what her eyes had glimpsed earlier. Those men weren't random. They were enforcers for the local syndicate, the ones who'd been squeezing the diner owner for protection money, turning honest folk into ghosts. "Ethan!" she shouted into the storm as the fight raged inside, her voice cutting through the roar. He emerged moments later, blood trickling from a split lip, dragging the leader by the collar before shoving him into the mud. The others scattered like rats, tires squealing into the night. Panting, Ethan turned to her, rain streaming down his face. "What is it?" he asked, sensing the urgency in her wide eyes. She pointed to the bike, words tumbling out. "They cut your brakes. Before you even got here. I saw them. It's a setup." The revelation hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds. Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of something ancient igniting in his eyes. The promise he'd buried, now clawing its way back. This wasn't just about his ride. It was about the web of corruption that snared places like this, preying on the weak while badges looked away. He'd walked away from fights like this before, but tonight, with this stranger's warning echoing like a call to arms, he felt the pull of his old oath. One act of loyalty could unravel it all, drawing his scattered brothers from across the horizon. As the rain eased to a drizzle, Ethan knelt by his bike, fingers tracing the sabotage with a mechanic's precision. The diner light buzzed overhead, illuminating the determination etching deeper into his features. Emily stood beside him, soaked and shivering, but unbowed, a quiet alliance forming in the shadows. Little did they know, this moment would summon the iron promise like a thunderclap, 97 riders converging by dawn to chase justice down the endless road. But for now, in the hush after the storm, Ethan straightened, meeting her gaze. "You just saved my life," he said softly. "Now it's time I return the favor." The drizzle hung in the air like a veil, turning the parking lot into a mirror of fractured lights from the diner's sign. Ethan crouched beside his Harley, the cold metal biting into his calloused palms as he examined the severed brake lines more closely. Fluid oozed slowly onto the cracked asphalt, mixing with puddles that reflected the faint glow of distant headlights on the highway. The sabotage was clean, deliberate, no amateur hack job, but the work of someone who knew bikes inside out, someone with a grudge sharp enough to kill. He straightened up slowly, his leather creaking, and wiped his hands on his jeans, the scent of hydraulic fluid sharp against the earthy petrichor of the storm-washed night. Emily hovered a few steps away, her apron twisted in her fists, water dripping from her dark hair onto her collar. She wasn't the type to run from trouble. 5 years slinging plates in this godforsaken spot had toughened her like old leather. But this felt bigger, a shadow stretching beyond the diner's grease-stained walls. "Those guys, they're not just locals," she said, her voice low, barely cutting through the hum of the cooling engine. "They work for Harlan Voss, runs the mill on the edge of town, but everyone knows it's a front, protection rackets, shaking down anyone who won't bend. The sheriff's in his pocket, turns a blind eye for a cut of the take." Ethan's eyes narrowed, scanning the empty road where the taillights of the fleeing truck had long vanished. Harlan Voss. The name tugged at a frayed thread in his memory, a whisper from a roadside bar 2 states back. where a fellow rider had nursed a beer and muttered about a syndicate bleeding dry the heartland towns. Ethan's own past echoed in it. The brother he'd lost to a similar web of greed, gunned down in a dust-up over unpaid debts that weren't his. That promise, sworn over a fresh grave under a relentless sun, had pulled him into the Iron Promise MC. Stand for the overlooked, ride against the tide of corruption. He'd drifted from it after the divorce, after watching his daughter Lily slip into her own battles with addiction, too far gone for his calls to reach. But here, with this woman's warning pulling him back, the oath felt alive again, humming like the vibration under his boots. "I need to get word out," he said finally, pulling a battered phone from his inner pocket. The screen cracked like his resolve, but it lit up under his thumb. He dialed a number etched into his soul, one that connected him to the scattered brothers who'd forged their bond in foxholes and on forgotten freeways. The line crackled, then connected. "Matthew, it's Ethan. Got a situation down on Route 17, outskirts of Blackridge. Brakes cut. Locals with bad intentions. Syndicate play. You read me?" On the other end, Matthew's voice came through rough as gravel, the background noise of a late-night garage, clanging tools, low radio static, painting the scene in Ethan's mind. Matthew, the wiry ex-Marine with a prosthetic leg from a roadside bomb in some desert hell, had been the first to pull Ethan into the club after his brother's funeral. "Ethan, hell, it's been months. What's the play? You need extraction?" "Not yet, but it's bigger than me. They're preying on folks like this place. Honest work ground under heel. Remember that oath in '98, by the old oak after we pulled that kid from the wreck? Iron holds." There was a pause, the weight of shared ghosts filling the silence. Matthew knew the story, the promise to protect, to ride as one against the shadows that devoured the vulnerable. "I'm calling it in. Get the word to the others. By dawn, if we move right." Emily watched him, arms crossed against the chill, her breath visible in the cooling air. The diner door creaked open behind her, the owner peering out, a grizzled man named Samuel, his face pale under the porch light. "You two all right?" Heard the commotion. "Those bastards been circling like vultures." He glanced at the bike, then at Ethan, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Iron Promise? Heard tales. If you're half what they say, maybe you can do what we can't." Inside, the phone conversation unfolded like a map unrolling on a scarred table. Matthew rallied the crew with quiet efficiency, calls to Jonathan in the next county, overhauling engines in his shop, to Samuel, no, wait, another Samuel, the medic who'd patched them up after a brawl with coyotes in the Badlands, to David, the quiet enforcer with a poet's soul, nursing a coffee in a motel off I-40. Each voice carried the echo of old bonds, veterans, outcasts, men who'd chosen family over blood, bound by the unbreakable chain of their patch. "We're coming," Matthew said finally. 97 strong if we pull 'em all. But Ethan, you sure? Last time you rode point, it cost you Lily's visits." The mention stung like salt in a fresh cut, but Ethan pushed it down, staring at the horizon where lightning flickered like a distant signal fire. "That's why. Can't run forever. This starts here. Protect the line." He hung up, pocketing the phone, and turned to Emily and Samuel. "You got a back room?" "Need to lay low till the crew rolls in. Voss's men might circle back." Samuel nodded, ushering them inside. The bell tinkling softly as the door shut against the night. The diner felt smaller now, walls closing in with the scent of cooling pie and lingering smoke from the grill. Emily poured fresh coffee, her hands steadier, sliding mugs across the counter. "Why help us? You could have just fixed the bike and ridden out." Ethan sipped, the bitterness grounding him, steam curling like unspoken regrets. "Made a promise once, to a brother gone too soon. Said I'd stand when it counted, thought I'd forgotten it, buried under miles and mistakes. But seeing you run out here risking your neck, it pulled it all back." His eyes met hers, steady, the lines around them deepening in the warm light. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the pines that bordered the lot, carrying the faint rumble of approaching thunder, or was it engines already gathering on the wind? As the hours ticked toward dawn, tension coiled like a spring in the dim booth where they waited. Samuel shared fragments of the town's decay. Voss's grip tightening after the mill fire 2 years back, blamed on accidents that silenced dissenters. Emily spoke of her own scars, a family fractured by the same greed, her sister vanishing into the syndicate's underbelly, leaving only echoes and unanswered calls. Ethan's story emerged in pieces. The war that claimed his father, the brother avenged too late, the daughter he'd failed by riding away. In the quiet exchanges, alliances formed, fragile as the first light creeping over the hills. A low growl shattered the hush, headlights piercing the windows, not the storm's fury, but a single truck idling at the lot's edge. Voss's scouts, perhaps, testing the waters. Ethan rose, hand on the door, Emily at his side. "Stay back," he murmured, but she shook her head, fire in her eyes. The engine revved, then peeled away, leaving only tire tracks in the mud. It was a warning, but Ethan saw it for what it was, fear. The iron promise was stirring, a force gathering like storm clouds, ready to roll over the corruption that festered here. By the time the sky blushed pink, the first bikes appeared on the horizon. Matthew leading a vanguard of 10, leathers gleaming, engines harmonizing in a symphony of resolve. More would come, the call rippling out like a chain reaction. Ethan stepped out, the air crisp with promise, Emily watching from the doorway. This ride wasn't just for breaks or a diner, it was for reclaiming what honor demanded, one silent stand at a time. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments they reach you. The first rays of dawn sliced through the pines like golden knives, painting the diner's parking lot in hues of amber and shadow. Engines rumbled in the distance, a growing chorus that vibrated through the ground, stirring the dew-kissed gravel. Ethan stood at the edge of the lot, his silhouette stark against the light. Arms crossed over his chest as he watched the horizon. The air carried the crisp bite of morning, mingled with the faint ozone from last night's storm and the oily tang of idling Harleys. Matthew's vanguard pulled in first, 10 bikes in tight formation, their chrome catching the sun like polished shields. The riders dismounted in unison, boots crunching on the asphalt, nods exchanged in silent acknowledgement of the call that had pulled them from their beds. Matthew approached Ethan, clapping a hand on his shoulder, the prosthetic leg giving a faint metallic click with each step. His face, weathered by desert sands and bad memories, split into a grim smile. "Told you we'd come." Jonathan's trailing with 20 more from the East shop, said to hell with the early rush hour, and David's got the word out to the southern chapter. They're mobilizing quiet, no lights. The crew fanned out, forming a loose perimeter around the diner, eyes scanning the tree line, where shadows still lingered. They weren't a mob, they were a brotherhood, pieced together from men who'd stared down worse than small-town thugs. Veterans like Noah, who nursed a limp from a chopper crash in some forgotten conflict, and Ryan, the quiet welder whose hands bore the scars of fixing what others broke. Inside, Emily poured coffee into mismatched mugs, the steam rising like fragile hopes in the warming room. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow with a rag that smelled of fryer oil, his voice low as he recounted more of Voss's reach. "It's not just the mill. He owns the feed store, the gas station, squeezes till folks like me got no choice but to pay or fold. Last month, old Mrs. Harper lost her farm. They claimed debts, but it was payback for speaking up at town hall." Emily's hands paused on the pot, her eyes distant, remembering her sister's disappearance 2 years prior, a girl who'd waitressed here too, drawn into Voss's web with promises of easy work that turned sour. The pain etched quiet lines on her face, a mirror to Ethan's own regrets. Ethan joined them at the counter, the bell above the door jingling softly as the last rider stepped in. "We ride smart," he said, voice steady as the tick of the wall clock. "No guns, no chaos. We expose him, get the truth out, force the sheriff's hand, or drag him into the light." The plan unfolded like a well-worn map. Scouts to circle the mill, document the rackets without confrontation. A core group to escort Samuel and Emily to safety, if things heated. The rest to block the roads, a wall of leathers and resolve. It was the iron promise in action. Not vengeance, but justice carved from loyalty, honoring the oath sworn under that old oak decades ago when they'd pulled a family from a fiery wreck and vowed never to look away again. As the crew fortified their positions, a low hum grew from the south, more bikes, 30 strong now, engines harmonizing like a distant thunder roll. Jonathan led them, his broad frame unmistakable even from afar, a former line cook turned mechanic who'd patched Ethan's wounds after that border loss. They carried tools and cameras, not weapons, ready to dismantle the syndicate's lies piece by piece. Emily watched from the window, her breath fogging the glass, a mix of fear and fire in her chest. "You really think this'll stick? Boss has friends in high places, judges, councilmen." Ethan met her gaze in the reflection, his eyes holding the weight of roads traveled alone. "It will if we hold the line. Promises like ours don't break easy." The morning light strengthened, bathing the lot in clarity, but tension coiled tighter as a dust cloud rose on the access road. Not allies. A black SUV, tinted windows gleaming like obsidian, flanked by 2 pickups. Voss's enforcers returning to press their advantage, unaware of the gathering storm. The bikes revved in response, a unified growl that shook the windows, riders mounting up with fluid grace. Ethan swung onto his repaired Harley, brake lines patched by Ryan's steady hands during the wait. The seat familiar under him. A lifeline to the man he'd been before the miles eroded his edges. The SUV halted at the lot's edge, doors opening to reveal the snake-tattooed leader from the night before, his jaw still bruised, flanked by 4 more shadows. Harlan Voss himself emerged last, a tall man in a crisp shirt that belied his dirt, silver hair slicked back, eyes cold as mill steel. "Heard you had company, old-timer," he called, voice carrying over the idling engines, laced with false charm. "This town's got rules. You iron boys think you can play hero, ride on, or we'll make it stick." His men shifted, hands hovering near pockets, but the bikers held formation, unmoving, a wall of silence more intimidating than shouts. Ethan throttled his engine once, the roar cutting the air like a declaration. "We're not here for trouble, Voss, but we're done watching you bleed this place dry. We've got eyes on your games, photos, witnesses. Sheriff might look away, but the truth rides farther." Voss's face tightened, a flicker of unease breaking his poise as he scanned the growing numbers. 50 now, with more crests visible on the horizon. Emily stepped out beside Samuel, her presence a quiet anchor, whispering to Ethan, "My sister's out there somewhere, if this works." He nodded, the promise unspoken but binding. The standoff stretched, seconds ticking like heartbeats, the scent of exhaust mingling with pine sap. Voss barked an order, his men advancing a step, but Matthew's crew closed ranks, engines popping in warning. No fists flew yet. This was the dance of wills. Morality clashing against greed under the rising sun. Ethan felt the pull of his past, the brother's grave, Lily's unanswered letters, fueling the resolve that had drawn these men across states. Redemption wasn't a grand speech. It was this moment, standing firm for strangers who'd become kin. As Voss retreated to his vehicle, tires spinning gravel in retreat, the air buzzed with the victory of restraint. But Ethan knew it was just the opening salvo. The real ride lay ahead, chasing shadows to the mill's heart. The crew mobilized, bikes lining up in a serpentine chain, ready to carve justice from the dawn. Emily climbed into Samuel's old truck, trailing the convoy, her hand on the door like a vow. The road called, promising trials that would test every scar, every bond, forging something unbreakable from the dust. The convoy snaked through the winding backroads like a living chain, engines thrumming in low harmony against the morning's crisp veil. Dust trailed in lazy spirals from the tires, catching the sunlight in golden motes that danced over the parched earth. Ethan led the pack, his Harley cutting the lead with purposeful grace, the patched brake lines a silent testament to the night's fragile trust. Behind him, the iron promise stretched out. 70 riders now, their leathers weathered by sun and storm, patches gleaming like badges of forgotten oaths. Matthew rode flank, his prosthetic leg braced steady, while Jonathan anchored the rear, his broad frame a bulwark against any shadow that might tail them. Emily's truck hummed in the midst, Samuel at the wheel, her silhouette visible in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the road ahead with a mix of resolve and quiet dread. The mill loomed on the outskirts like a rusted sentinel, its skeletal silos piercing the sky, surrounded by chain-link fences that whispered of isolation and control. The air grew heavy with the metallic tang of rust and the faint, acrid bite of processed lumber, a scent that clung to the workers' clothes like an unwelcome shadow. As the bikes crested the final hill, the growl of their arrival echoed off the corrugated walls, drawing heads from the loading docks, men in hard hats pausing mid-task, their faces a mosaic of wariness and whispered rumors. Voss's empire wasn't built on brute force alone. It thrived on fear, on the slow erosion of hope, until compliance felt like survival. But today that illusion cracked under the weight of approaching thunder. Ethan signaled a halt at the perimeter, engines idling to a murmur as the crew dismounted in fluid unison. No one spoke. Words were for the road, actions for the stand. Ryan, the welder with hands like forged iron, knelt by the fence, his tools glinting as he snipped a discreet gap. Enough for scouts to slip through without fanfare. "Eyes only," Ethan reminded them, his voice carrying low over the group. "Document the rot. No heroes today." The scouts, lean figures like Noah, whose limp didn't slow his stealth, vanished into the underbrush, cameras at the ready, hearts pounding with the echo of that old promise. Expose the darkness, light the way for the overlooked. Inside the mill's shadowed heart, Emily stepped from the truck, her boots crunching on gravel that held the ghosts of lost livelihoods. Samuel stayed close, his grizzled features set in determination, but it was her fire that burned brightest now. "My sister's name was Grace," she said softly to Ethan as they approached the main gate, the words slipping out like a confession long held. "She worked the night shift here 2 years back. Said the pay was good, no questions. Then one morning, she didn't come home. Voss claims she quit, but I know better. Saw the bruises, heard the whispers. If she's still in there." Her voice trailed, swallowed by the wind rustling through the pines, but Ethan nodded, the weight of his own failures mirroring hers. Lily's face flashed in his mind, her last letter crumpled in his saddlebag, begging for a father who hadn't ridden back in time. The gate creaked open under pressure from the rider's presence, no guards bold enough to challenge the growing tide. Voss waited in the yard, arms crossed over his crisp shirt, now dusted with mill grit, his silver hair catching the light like a false halo. Flanking him were a dozen enforcers, faces hardened by years of dirty work. But their stances betrayed unease, the snake-tattooed leader nursing his jaw, eyes darting to the encircling bikes. "This is private property," Voss snarled, his voice laced with the authority of a man used to unchallenged rule. "You trespass, and the sheriff's on speed dial. What do you want, biker? My mill's legit. Jobs for the town, prosperity." Ethan stepped forward, the group parting like a wave, his boots steady on the uneven ground. The air hummed with tension, the distant clank of machinery underscoring the standoff like a ticking clock. Prosperity? For who? We've got stories from Blackridge. Folks squeezed till they break, farms foreclosed on debts that smell like extortion. Your protection rackets end here. He pulled a folded printout from his vest. Photos from the scouts already filtering back via text. Ledgers hidden in the foreman's office, marked with payoffs to the sheriff. Crates in the warehouse stamped with illicit cargo, far from lumber. Ryan had relayed the images moments ago, his voice crackling over the radio. It's worse than we thought. Human traffic hints, workers not paid, held like debts. Voss's facade cracked, a vein pulsing at his temple as he scanned the evidence thrust toward him. Lies, fabricated by drifters. But his eyes flickered to Emily, recognition dawning like a shadow. You, the waitress. Your sister's loose ends aren't my doing. She chose her path. The words hung poisonous, but Emily advanced, her voice steady as the rising sun. Chose. Or cornered. Show us the records, Voss, or we'll ride this truth straight to every news outlet from here to the coast. The crew murmured agreement, a low rumble that matched their engines, hands resting on handlebars, not threats, but reminders of the unbreakable line they formed. A shout from the warehouse shattered the moment, one of the scouts, Noah, emerging with a young woman in tow, her face pale and drawn, clothes threadbare. Grace. Emily's breath caught, a sob escaping as she rushed forward, arms enveloping her sister in the embrace that spoke volumes of nights spent searching shadows. Grace whispered fragments, held for debts her family never owed, forced labor under threat, the syndicate's grip tighter than any chain. Voss's men shifted, but the riders closed in, a silent wall of leathers and loyalty, Matthew's voice cutting through. It's over. Walk away clean, or we drag it all into the light. The moral weight pressed down, Voss's empire crumbling not under fists, but under the unyielding truth. He barked retreat, his enforcers scattering like leaves in the wind, the snake leader casting a venomous glare before vanishing into a side door. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the sheriff perhaps rushing to salvage his cut, but the iron promise held firm, engines revving in preparation for the next leg. Ethan watched Emily with grace, the reunion a balm on old wounds, stirring his own longing for Lily. Redemption wasn't a solo ride, it was this, chosen kin standing against the tide, honoring promises that outlasted the scars. As the dust settled, the convoy reformed, Grace safely in the truck, the evidence secured. The road to true justice stretched ahead, winding through ethical minefields and institutional shadows. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt the chain of his oath whole again. The mill faded in the mirrors, a relic of greed yielding to honor's quiet force. If this chapter's tension has you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps spread these stories of loyalty and redemption far and wide. The sun climbed higher, turning the back roads into ribbons of shimmering heat as the convoy pressed on, a steel serpent winding toward Blackridge's heart. Dust devils swirled in their wake, kicked up by the relentless growl of engines that echoed like a vow carried on the wind. Ethan rode point, the vibration of his Harley thrumming through his bones, a rhythm that matched the pulse of unresolved ghosts. The evidence bag strapped to his saddlebag felt heavier than lead. Photos, ledgers, Grace's whispered testimony recorded on a borrowed phone. It wasn't just paper. It was the unraveling of Voss's web, threads of corruption that snaked through the town like roots choking the soil. But justice didn't come clean in places like this. It demanded payment in blood, sweat, and the quiet erosion of the soul. Emily's truck trailed close, Grace huddled in the back seat, her frail form wrapped in Samuel's spare jacket, the fabric swallowing her like a shroud. The sisters' reunion at the mill had been a raw wound reopening, tears mixing with the grit of the yard. words tumbling in fragments about nights spent in locked bunkers, forced to sort illicit shipments under dim bulbs that buzzed like angry hornets. Grace's eyes, hollowed by months of fear, now held a spark of defiance, fanned by Emily's unyielding grip. "He said we'd never get out," Grace murmured earlier, her voice cracking over the truck's rumble. "Voss promised the sheriff would bury any noise, but you came. Like some kind of guardian." Emily had squeezed her hand, the calluses from diner shifts a stark contrast to her sister's softened palms, both marked by the same invisible chains of loss. Behind them, the iron promise rode as one, a tapestry of scarred lives woven tight. Matthew scanned the mirrors, his prosthetic leg a steady anchor against the bike's sway, while Noah limped alongside on his customized chopper, the limp a badge from a war that had taken more than flesh. Ryan brought up the flank, his welder's eyes sharp for any tale, the scars on his knuckles gleaming under the relentless light. They'd left the mill in disarray, workers emerging from hiding, murmuring thanks that hung in the air like incense. But Voss's retreat wasn't surrender. Sirens had wailed closer as they rolled out, the sheriff's cruiser cutting through the fields like a predator scenting blood. Ethan felt it in his gut. The lawman would circle, bought and bound, turning their stand into a hunt. The town square unfolded ahead, a faded crossroads of clapboard stores and a courthouse that squatted like a judgmental elder, its steeple casting a long shadow over the cracked pavement. Folks paused in their midday routines, housewives with grocery bags, mechanics wiping grease from brows, eyes widening at the influx of leathers and chrome. Whispers rippled like wind through dry grass. Iron promise, heard they don't bend. Ethan signaled a pull-off at the central lot, engines cutting to a hush that amplified the ticking of cooling metal and the distant hum of a lawnmower. The crew dismounted, forming a loose circle around the truck, boots scuffing the dust as they waited, breaths steady but alert. Sheriff Harlan's cruiser screeched to a halt at the square's edge, lights flashing silent warnings, no siren to alert the corrupt. He stepped out, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a badge polished brighter than his conscience, mustache twitching like a cornered rat's whiskers. Flanking him were two deputies, hands on holsters, faces schooled in false authority. "Ethan Hale," the sheriff drawled, his voice oily as the blacktop underfoot, eyes flicking over the riders like he was tallying threats. "Got reports of trespassing at the mill. Voss is a pillar here. Jobs, community. You boys stirring mud in clear water?" Ethan met his gaze, the sun beating down on his back like an old friend's encouragement, sweat tracing the lines of his scars. The air carried the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine from a nearby porch, clashing with the sheriff's cologne of authority and deceit. "Stirring, we're shining light, Harlan, on payoffs, on holding folks like Grace against their will. Your name's in those books, cuts from the rackets." He held out the evidence, pages fluttering slightly in the breeze, but the sheriff didn't take them, his face hardening into a mask of denial. One deputy shifted, glancing at Emily as she helped Grace from the truck, the sisters' embrace drawing murmurs from the gathering crowd. "That's coercion," the sheriff snapped, pointing a thick finger. "Voss says you roughed up his men, planted lies. I could run you all in for disturbing the peace." Tension coiled tighter, the rider's hands flexing instinctively, but Matthew's low murmur held them. "Easy. Truth's our weapon." Noah edged forward, his limp deliberate, pulling a small recorder from his vest. Grace's voice played tinny but clear. Accounts of locked doors, threats veiled as loyalty oaths, the syndicate's grip squeezing life from the desperate. The sheriff's poise cracked, sweat beading on his brow despite the shade of his hat. Townsfolk edged closer now, phones raised, capturing the moment like fireflies in the daylight. Emily stepped up, her voice cutting through the murmurs, steady as the diner's coffee pot. "My sister didn't vanish by choice. You looked the other way when she needed help. How many more?" Grace nodded beside her, frail but unbroken, the weight of her story pressing down on the lawman like an unseen hand. Harlan's eyes darted to the crowd, calculating the shift, the whispers turning to open stares, the illusion of his power fraying at the edges. "This ain't over," he growled, backing toward his cruiser, deputies following like shadows retreating from light. "Voss has pull. You'll regret this ride." Tires spun gravel as he peeled away, leaving a haze that settled slow over the square. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, hands clapping like distant thunder, faces alight with the rare taste of reckoning. Ethan exhaled, the knot in his chest loosening just a fraction, but the road ahead loomed with shadows. Voss wouldn't fade quietly. Allies in higher places would stir. He turned to Emily, her eyes meeting his with a gratitude that mirrored his own buried hopes. "You gave her back," he said softly. The words carrying the echo of his promise to his brother now extended to this chosen circle. Grace smiled faintly, touching his arm. "Thank you, all of you." The crew remounted, engines firing in unison. But Ethan lingered, pulling his phone from the saddlebag. Lily's number glowed on the screen, unanswered for too long. This stand had cracked something in him, the isolation of miles giving way to the pull of kin, blood and chosen alike. As the convoy reformed, heading toward the county line where state eyes might listen, the sun dipped toward afternoon, casting long shadows that danced with possibility. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was the ride itself, honoring oaths that bound tighter than any chain, one moral turn at a time. But in the rear view, a lone figure watched from the courthouse steps, Voss's shadow, plotting the counterstrike that would test their unbreakable line. The asphalt blurred into a hypnotic streak under the tires as the convoy pushed toward the county line, the late afternoon sun slanting low like a spotlight on a stage set for reckoning. Ethan's Harley led the charge, its engine a steady growl that drowned out the doubts whispering in his mind, the wind whipping at his vest with fingers that smelled of pine and exhaust. The evidence bag bounced lightly against his thigh, a talisman of truths unearthed, ledgers stained with ink and greed, Grace's recorded pleas echoing in his memory like distant thunder. 70 bikes trailed in disciplined waves, their riders a mosaic of resolve. Matthew's focused gaze in the side mirror, Noah's chopper hugging the curves despite the limp he carried in his soul. Ryan scanning the flanks with the precision of a man who'd mended more than machines. Emily's truck hummed in the protected core, Grace dozing fitfully against her sister's shoulder. The jacket's hood, framing a face finally free of the mill's shadows. The air inside carried the faint, comforting scent of diner coffee from a thermos Samuel had packed, mingling with the road's dusty tang that seeped through the vents. Emily's hands gripped the wheel tighter now, knuckles white against the fading light, her thoughts a whirlwind of relief and foreboding. "He won't let this go," she said softly to Samuel, who nodded from the passenger seat, his grizzled beard catching the golden rays. "Voss plays long games. That sheriff was just the first card." Samuel grunted, eyes on the rear view where the iron promise formed an unbreakable shield. "But we've got the truth now, and truth rides faster than lies." The county line approached like a threshold, marked by a weathered sign half obscured by overgrown weeds, the kind of border that separated corrupt hollows from wider justice. Ethan throttled down, signaling the pull-off at a roadside overlook, a gravel turnout overlooking valleys that rolled like rumpled blankets under the sinking sun. Engines cut one by one, the sudden silence amplifying the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk wheeling overhead. The crew gathered in a loose semicircle, boots grinding pebbles as they stretched legs and shared water from canteens that tasted of metal and miles. Jonathan dismounted last, his broad shoulders rolling as he approached Ethan, a satellite phone in hand. "State troopers are en route. Got a contact from the old VA days. They'll take the evidence, run it up the chain. Clean, no blowback on us." Ethan nodded, but his jaw tightened, the lines around his eyes deepening in the amber light. The phone felt heavy in his pocket, Lily's number burning like an unfulfilled promise. He'd called her from the square, voice rough over the connection. "It's Dad. I've been riding wrong, kid, but I'm fixing it now. Come home when you're ready." Her pause had been a chasm, then a whisper. "Maybe." It wasn't absolution, but it was a crack in the wall he'd built. The iron promises stand reminding him that redemption started with one turn of the wheel. He scanned the horizon, the valleys giving way to the faint outline of Blackridge's lights, twinkling like wary eyes. "We hand it off here, but if Voss moves first—" The words hung unfinished as a low rumble intruded. Not their engines, but something sharper, mechanical, closing from the east. Headlights pierced the dusk, not a lone cruiser but a phalanx. 3 unmarked vans, black as midnight oil, flanked by pickups that kicked up gravel like angry hornets. Voss's counterstrike bolder now, away from prying town eyes. The vans skidded to a halt, 50 yards out, doors sliding open to disgorge a dozen figures, hardened types in tactical vests, faces obscured by balaclavas, hands gripping bats and chains that glinted ominously. No badges, no pretense. This was the syndicate's underbelly bared, the sheriff's influence buying them this shadowed stretch of road. Tension crackled like static, the iron promise shifting into formation without a word. Bikes angled as barriers, riders standing shoulder to shoulder, a wall of leathers and unyielding stares. Matthew's hand went to his hip, not for a weapon, but a flare gun from his saddlebag, a signal for the troopers still minutes away. "They want the evidence," he muttered to Ethan, voice low under the rising wind. "Or us." Noah edged forward, his limp forgotten in the adrenaline surge, while Ryan's fists clenched, scars pulling tight. Emily and Grace peered from the truck's cab, Samuel barring the door with his frame, the air inside thickening with the metallic scent of fear sweat. The lead van's door banged open, and out stepped the snake-tattooed enforcer, his jaw a purple bruise under the mask's edge, eyes burning with last night's grudge. "Hand over the girl and the bag, biker," he snarled, voice carrying over the gravel crunch of advancing boots. "Voss says this ends quiet. No mill, no square, just a bad turn on a back road." Voss himself wasn't there, but his shadow loomed in the command. A man who delegated dirt to keep his hands clean. The attackers fanned out, chains rattling like serpents, closing the gap with the swagger of numbers on their side. Ethan stepped to the fore, the group parting just enough, his presence a quiet anchor amid the brewing storm. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that danced across the overlook like spectres of old battles. "You touch them, and the promise breaks," he said, voice steady as forged steel, invoking the oath that bound them all, the one sworn in blood and brotherhood to shield the vulnerable from greed's jaws. It wasn't bravado. It was the core of who he'd become again, the miles of running yielding to this stand. The enforcer laughed, a bark swallowed by the wind, and lunged, chains swinging in a wide arc that whistled through the air. The clash erupted in controlled fury, fists meeting flesh with dull thuds, boots scraping gravel as bodies tangled. Ethan dodged the chain, countering with a precise elbow that sent the leader staggering, not down but warned. Matthew fired the flare skyward, a crimson streak blooming against the twilight, summoning aid, while he grappled a masked figure, prosthetic leg planting firm like an unmovable root. Noah swung a loose branch like a staff, his movements economical, protecting the truck's flank as Emily's shout pierced the fray. "Grace, stay down!" Ryan waded in, his welder's strength turning a bat aside, the impact vibrating through the air like a struck gong. No blades, no lethal intent from the riders. Their fight was moral, a barrier of wills against the tide of corruption. Punches landed with grunts that echoed off the valley walls, the scent of sweat and disturbed earth rising sharp. One attacker breached the line, yanking at the truck's door, but Samuel's shoulder met him like a battering ram, the old diner's resilience unbowed. Ethan broke free, tackling the snake man to the ground, pinning him with knees that bore the weight of years. "Tell Voss it's over," he growled, breath hot against the mask. "The truth's out. Your boss's house of cards falls tonight." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing to a howl that scattered the attackers like smoke on the breeze. Vans reversed in chaos, tires spinning divots into the gravel, leaving behind two crumpled forms, enforcers nursing wounds, not graves. The flare's glow faded, replaced by the blue pulse of approaching lights, state troopers, badges gleaming true, pulling up with radios crackling. They took statements in the cooling dusk, the evidence bag passed like a sacred relic, Grace's testimony drawing nods of grim understanding. Emily hugged her sister tighter, tears tracing clean paths down dust-streaked cheeks, while Samuel clapped Ethan's back, a silent bond forged in the heat. As the troopers led the captured away, cuffs clicking like final judgments, Ethan remounted his bike, the engine's rumble a soothing balm. The crew reformed, battered but whole, the overlook now a marker of lines held. Lily's call echoed in his mind, a bridge half built, waiting for the next ride. Voss's web was fraying, but the final threads led deeper, to hearts corrupted beyond the mill. The convoy rolled on into the night, stars emerging like witnesses, the promise unbroken, pulling them toward the dawn of true release. The night sky unfurled like a velvet banner overhead, stars piercing the velvet as the convoy crested the final rise toward the state border outpost. The engine's low growl softened to a murmur, the air thick with the cooling scent of asphalt and wild sagebrush that lined the roadside. Ethan's Harley led the pack, its headlight carving a path through the gathering dark. The evidence bag, now lighter in his saddlebag, handed off to the trooper's lead investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Agent Reyes, whose badge carried the weight of federal scrutiny. Grace's testimony had sealed it. Voss's operation wasn't just local rot. It spanned states, human chains disguised as labor debts, feeding a machine of exploitation that the Iron Promise had cracked wide open. Behind him, the riders formed a steadfast tale. 70 souls, leathers scuffed from the overlook skirmish, faces etched with the quiet satisfaction of lines held. Matthew rode steady at his flank, the prosthetic leg's faint click lost in the road's hum, while Noah's chopper wove with unerring grace, his limp a forgotten echo in the thrill of purpose. Ryan scanned the mirrors, his scarred hands loose on the grips, ever the sentinel. Emily's truck followed close, Grace asleep in the back, her breathing even for the first time in months, lulled by the motion and the safety of reclaimed kin. Samuel drove, his grizzled features softened by the dashboard glow, occasionally glancing at Emily with a nod that spoke of shared survival. The outpost loomed ahead, a squat building of cinder block and floodlights, its parking lot dotted with cruisers that pulsed blue and red like wary beacons. Agent Reyes waited at the gate, flanked by 2 uniforms, her notebook open against the chill wind that carried the faint, briny hint of a distant river. Ethan killed his engine first, the silence amplifying the gravel crunch under boots as the crew dismounted in a ripple of unity. No cheers, no boasts, just the steady rhythm of men who'd chosen this path, bound by oaths forged in fire and farewell. "You've given us enough to bury Voss," Reyes said, her voice crisp over the notepad's rustle, eyes scanning the riders with professional respect. Ledgers match up, payoffs to the sheriff, holding patterns at the mill. Grace's account ties the knots. We'll move at dawn, raids on the safe houses, his city contacts. Clean sweep. She paused, glancing at Emily and Grace emerging from the truck, the sisters' hands clasped like an unbreakable link. "You folks, you turned the tide, not with guns, but guts." Ethan met her gaze, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the harsh light, the weight of his brother's grave lifting just a fraction. "It's the promise," he replied simply, the words carrying the echo of that old oak vigil, where they'd sworn to stand for the unseen. The air hummed with unspoken relief, the floodlights casting long shadows that danced like fading spectres of the day's battles. Grace stepped forward, her voice soft but clear, the threadbare jacket hanging loose on her frame. "They didn't have to come, but they did. For me, for all of us trapped in there." Reyes nodded, jotting a final note, the pen scratch of punctuation on the nightmare's end. As the troopers escorted Grace for a formal statement, Emily lingered by Ethan's side, the wind tugging at her hair, carrying the earthy scent of the river below. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her eyes reflecting the outpost's glow, a mix of exhaustion and newfound light. "That diner, it's just a job, but you made it mean something, saved more than breaks tonight." Ethan removed his helmet, running a scarred hand through salt and pepper hair, the cool air a balm on his bruised knuckles. "Wasn't just me. It's us, the family you build when blood lets you down." His mind flickered to Lily, the call from the square still resonating, her maybe a seed planted in cracked soil. He'd text her coordinates later, an open road for reconciliation. The crew gathered loosely around a flickering fire pit the troopers had lit, flames crackling with dry wood that popped and spat embers into the night, the warmth chasing the road's chill. Matthew passed a flask of black coffee, strong as tar, while Jonathan shared stories in low tones. The time they'd pulled a stranded vet from a blizzard, or the quiet ride that shut down a poacher ring preying on reservation lands. Laughter rippled, rare and genuine, binding them tighter than any chain. Samuel joined, his diner tales weaving in, nights of lost travelers finding solace over pie. The group a tapestry of chosen loyalty, scars shared like badges. Far off, Black Ridge's lights twinkled mockingly, but the tide had turned. Dawn reports would crack Voss's facade, arrests at the mill, the sheriff in cuffs, his empire crumbling under the flood of evidence. No graphic ends, just the quiet unraveling of greed, justice served not in blood, but in the light of truth. Ethan watched the fire, embers rising like freed souls, feeling the pull of his own redemption. The miles ahead called, to Lily, to new stands, but for now, this was enough, the promise fulfilled, the iron promise unbroken. As the first hints of dawn blushed the horizon, the convoy stirred, engines firing in a symphony of resolve, bikes lined up one last time, headlights piercing the fading dark like stars falling to earth. Emily waved from the truck, Grace beside her, a future reclaimed. Ethan throttled his Harley, the vibration a heartbeat renewed, leading his brothers into the light. The road stretched endless, but the weight was lifted, honor reclaimed, family forged, one silent ride at a time. Thank you for joining this journey of loyalty and redemption. If these stories touch your heart, please subscribe for more tales of unbreakable promises.